Alexander the Great of ancient Greece, who lived around 330 BC, and the gateway to the stars, Arna Stone. Arna Stone, or simply having to do with a location in Swat or Shangla district in Pakistan. It was the area where the siege of Hornstone took place, which was Alexander the Great's last siege at the height of Alexander the Great's career as the greatest sieger in history, according to Alexander the Great's contemporary biographer Robin Lane Fox. When was the siege? The siege took place in the winter of 327 BC to the spring of 326 BC. The site was satisfactorily identified with the modern Mount Pir Sar in Swat, Pakistan, by Sir Aurel Stein in 1926 and has been confirmed by archaeologists. Arnos Petra and the ancient Indian forces guarded it clearly posed a threat to the supply line of Alexander the Great's troops, which stretched dangerously vulnerable over the great massif of South Central Asia, the Hindu Kush region, or Hindu Kush, Pashto, Persian, Urdu, as far back as today's Balkh or Balkha, Zarispa or Bactria, English Balkh. Although Aryan cities as the main cause, the heroic desire that Alexander the Great had to surpass as his descendant, Hercules himself, who allegedly had failed to understand this in the mythological past. So Hercules of Thebes, he had a twin brother as well. Hercules was supposedly, Hercules was an ancestor of Alexander the Great. According to Arian, Arnos Petra is located between the Gurai River and the Indus River Valley. The Gurai River is located between the Imau Mountains, present-day Western Himalayas in northern Pakistan, and the Swasti River, present-day Swat River in northwest Pakistan, which is downstream of the Hidaspi River, present-day Jhelum River, of the Punjab region. Let's remember that Alexander the Great lost a third of his warriors going into the Taklamakan area of China. He was to meet an Atlantean extraterrestrial there, who was to land there with his UFO craft, and the Atlantean was to give him a weapon of great technology with which he was able to conquer wherever he went. He lost a third of his warriors, 10,000 warriors he lost there. Now, because Taklamakan means, as we know in the local language, you go in, but you can never come out. It's so deadly. Now, from studies by archaeologist Aurel Stein, it's estimated that the Ars Petra today is called Pir Sar, located in the few kilometers west of the Indus Valley, north of Bunur River, in northern Pakistan, close to the current border with northern Afghanistan. So when you start a campaign, you definitely have to set a goal in the first place. You don't start completely by accident, that's for sure. But what could have been that powerful motive other than to conquer the territories to begin this great journey? Many times the children are not allowed by their parents to choose for their lives, the parents having their own aspirations, because many times they hide behind an influence they positively or negative have. In this case, the attitude and position of the mother of Alexander the Great, Olympiada, seems to play an important role. She kept on calling him the son of a god, in order to nurture her child into something great. As a mother, she certainly does not want and does not seek for her child to leave and move away from her, as any mother would do, but she is initiated into the ancient Greek mysteries, so she gives a strong motivation to her son to achieve something great, and this is the Arnos Petra. This is the main and final goal, because there is a powerful channel of communication with the universe. It also has a peculiarity. It is fluctuating, when to open, when to close, since it has variability, so it can penetrate, but also the opposite, every kind of entity. In the communication channels, unknown to us, technological natural forces work, which transform light into concentrated photon beams at unimaginable speeds. Thus, as they multiply the intensity of the electromagnetic fields of the channel, they also prevent the escape of the strongest light energy. What is this, a black hole or something? The human organism that is in the center of this energy space, both the strong photonic beam as well as the intense electromagnetic fields, create a relaxation of the bonds of cells and molecules of matter. In other words, its density thins somewhat and it acquires a finer texture where it tends to become transparent and tunes in with the high frequencies of the photonic beam. This photonic beam is then amplified by the ionic energy of the human brain, and with the compression of the electromagnetic fields, they pass into another dimension of space-time dimensions. Isn't that something? Maybe this is what the Emerald Tablets do talk of, and I have a playlist of the Emerald Tablets and written by Thoth the Atlantean, Hermes Trismegistus, and he does talk about advanced technology. He does talk about interdimensional travel. And he does say that the Atlanteans had such advanced technology that they were not supposed to be using. They were going against the divine spirit's commandments. And he said it was just a matter of time before the divine God put an end to them, because they were using a lot of these technologies against humans, to the detriment of humans. I have a playlist of the Emerald Tablets. Please listen to them. It's for your benefit. So this photonic beam compresses the electromagnetic fields. They pass into another dimension of space-time dimensions. Human beings, when in channels, are in state of decondensation and change into very strong electromagnetic fields where they create a dense and impenetrable shell of orgone around them. Please see the fourth video before this one, the truth about the Parthenon of the Acropolis of Athens, the electromagnetic forces and the orgone, and of course the fact that it's basically a pyramid, and the statue of Athens Athena made out of gold was basically a conductor, and the strong electromagnetic fields and the electricity that was being radiated from that area for the whole city of Athens. Obviously, the ancients had a tremendous knowledge of ley lines, electromagnetic forces of the earth, and how to use them. And in this case, we're talking about passing into another dimension of space-time. Maybe that's why he went all the way to the end of China. Let's remember that Japan has recently found an ancient construction 70 feet down from the surface at Yonaguni. And Yonaguni basically in Greek means Yonan Guni, Gonia, meaning the corner of Yonan, the Greeks. The Greeks got there since antiquity. And that's why the historians of Alexander said that they had built a column with engravings saying that King Alexander reached up to this point. That is the Pacific Ocean. Now going back to this, human beings, when in channels, are in the state of decondensation and change into very strong electromagnetic fields where they create a dense and impenetrable shell of orgone around them. It sounds like Star Trek technology here. The energy electromagnetic currents of the universe can travel great distances in a very short time and penetrate the stars and the planets and to reach the edges of the universe without the slightest change in their material composition. Decondensation in energy spaces takes place at a specific time and at a specific location on the surface. Such phenomena are also observed in the temples at their summits at the height of 12 meters, because at 12 meters, man gets what we call height vertigo and thinks that the void is pulling him down. Of course, this does not happen either at 11 or 13 meters. We know, of course, that the number 12 is very important for that, and we have 12 gods, 6 plus 6, and the double height gives us, respectively, 12 times 12 is 144 meters, and also the height gives us 12 times 12 times 12, 1,728 meters, and twice that is 3,456 meters, 3456. These phenomena occur around noon and midnight. The main goal at that time was to close this exit passage, and this had to be done by an Earthman after submission and command, if you will, so that there would not be any unpleasant results that would burden the planet Earth. Now, if you see the video concerning the Athens Parthenon, it does say that if you misuse the electromagnetic forces, you can create chaos on the other side of the Earth. Now, Aornos Petra was located in the north of the city of Taxila or Taxasila. Thus, the campaign of Alexander the Great was about ancient India and the advance of the great soldier, that is Alexander the Great, to the east, as his central military force, the Macedonian army, finally decides to pass through the Siberian Pass, which is, and it was and is, a passage between of those mountains that today connect modern Afghanistan with Pakistan. I guess that's why he went to the east. He wanted to get this technology. However, it gives us the impression that another smaller force, under the personal supervision of Alexander the Great, passes by another route in north, where it meets on its way in the winter of the year 326 BC, the so-called fortress of Aornos. That's a place of high mythological importance for Greeks, where, according to Greek mythology, Hercules had then failed to capture it when he had already fought in India. When the fall of Hora took place, that is the ancient city of Hora, that is a city which is supposed to have been situated about the west bank of the Indus River and appears to be very important, for the defenders of the Wazirs realized that they were in a difficult position, so they abandoned it at night, their city, and to take refuge in a fortified location, where the other people of India did the same, who abandoned their cities en masse and took refuge in a more natural fort, the so-called Aornopetra. In the meantime, Hephaestion and Perdiccas, these were friends of Alexander the Great since he was, 3 or 4 years old. They became his generals. In the meantime, Hephaestion and Perdiccas succeeded and fortified Orovatida, today's Peshawar, and there they lived with a bridge over the Indus River. So Alexander the Great, with his staff, after turning Hora and Message into fortresses, finally fortified Vazira as a city and moved to the Indus, where the city of Pevkelautida had been captured, and followed by the Indian commanders of the region, Kophaos and Asageti, occupied many small riverside towns. So at Embolima, which is near Aortos Petra, he installed the general Crateros and gave him the order to collect a lot of supplies for a long siege. This indicates that he placed a lot of importance on the capture, however long it took, so the supplies had to be plentiful to achieve his main objective, and in the event that Aornos Petra did not fall with a raid relatively quickly, he would rely onto the exhaustion of its defenders. His siege, in other words. So he had archers, the so-called Agrarians, the order of the common, the best and the lightest infantry, 200 partners and 100 horse archers, and he moved from Embolima against the Aornopetra, again to Aornos Petra, and encamped somewhere near there. The next day he moved his camp even closer to the rock. A few local residents appeared and approached him and offered for money to show him the most vulnerable spot on the rock. Then Alexander sent with them Ptolemy, with the Agrarians, the other Psilus, and some of the most elite supporters, with orders to occupy the surrounding area and establish a garrison to keep him always informed of what was happening. Alexander waited for the move of Ptolemy, who finally succeeded, and went through a difficult route where he was not noticed by the Indian forces and occupied by fortifying his camp with a trench and ditch. Then Alexander the Great, after seeing the signal, that is, the torch lit by Ptolemy Soter, the very next day he set out to meet him, but the Indians, who knew the rugged region better, put up a very stiff resistance, and initially they hindered. Therefore, Alexander the Great fell back, and they turned against Ptolemy, believing that they had cut him off. The attack of the Indians was very ferocious, and although they were behind the Macedonians in archery, night had to fall before they retreated. Alexander's insistence to joining Ptolemy came true, and he sent a message with the loyal Indian Automulus. He is the one that succeeded in the first place. He fled to the ranks of the enemy, and at the first light the next day he started en route that Ptolemy had followed. So at noon they came into contact with the Indians, who now found themselves between the divisions of Ptolemy and Alexander. The Indians, of course, fought very hard, but Alexander's Macedonians were not overworked, precisely because Alexander's shock divisions followed one another in waves, and in the end, and with great difficulty, at dusk they succeeded and pushed all back the Indians from the pass. What I want to point out and emphasize so far is that his entire staff worked in coordination and obedience with worthy and capable warriors, but also a very brilliant staff of scientists of the time, where he predicted his every move so that he has as few as possible losses. The specific area of Arnapetra is located further north of the city of Attock of Pentapotamia, in the present-day Punjab region of Pakistan, and at that time it was a well-fortified fortress in the mountain and with a fairly narrow gorges in a bend of the upper course of the Indus River, where their fort therefore stood on a flat top, in which there was a sufficiency of water existing from the then natural springs, and it was wide enough at the same time to be cultivated accordingly, so those who defended it did not believe that they would be in danger of any starvation in case of any attack or siege that would be carried out by an opponent. It gives us the impression that such an obsession with this particular area, which was difficult and impassable, and why should his army suffer there, is a question that, from a strategic point of view, if he only wanted to conquer the area, he would have to choose the easier areas in general with mostly plains and go faster as well. So far, our sources for Arnos Petra are different, where according to Aryan Arnos Petra or Pir Sar was an impregnable rock, and the only access was only a path, artificial and difficult. How difficult the access was is emphasized by its Greek name Ornos, which indicates that neither Ornis, that is the bird, nor bird could step on it. Not man, not bird could step on it. However, it's probably a wrong etymology because the Sanskrit Avarna or Avarana, which means fortress or hiding place, is very close to the Greek Arnos. Arnos Petra had a circumference about 200 stadiums, that's 37 kilometers, and a height at its lowest point of 11 stadiums, that's 2 kilometers. On top of the rock, abundant water irrigated forests and land, which was fertile enough for 1,000 people to work. That is, it was a huge hardship for the besiegers and an incredible comfort for the besieged. Diodorus writes to us that it was a circular rock, about 3 kilometers high and 18.5 kilometers in circumference, so a surface of about 27 square kilometers, and at its southern foot the Indus River flowed. Quintus Curtius Rufus also agrees that the Indus flowed at the foot, but describes it as rugged, conical, and pointed. But let's see one by one all the actions of Alexander the Great before the occupation. In the first phase, the possible path of Alexander the Great to the natural fortress of Arnapetra was the neighboring tribes that succeeded or financed, surrendered, or allied with Alexander the Great, and thus offered to lead him to the best access point of the fortress of Arnos Petra. So his whole army advanced to the point of Arnos Petra, which the Indians indicated to them, and therefore encamped there. Ptolemy, who wrote the book on the Acts of Alexander, which has not survived, but is mentioned in a work by Arrian, the well-known biographer of the soldier Alexander Anavasis, and the Secretary-General Alexander the Great, Eumenes the Cardianus, of whose texts provide the basic bibliographical references for all this to posterity, where they attest that Alexander the Great reinforced his forces encamped to the west and guarded them with a hedge and a ditch. This therefore increases the possibility that another Alexandrian city was founded in the area with the characteristics of the Macedonian garrison, with the name Alexandria Arnos or Alexandria Arnou Petras, but at the moment there is no relevant archaeological confirmation for this. The fire signals used by the Macedonian corps also alerted the defenders of Arnos Petra, resulting in 2 days of additional skirmishing in the narrow gorges and Alexander being forced to regroup his forces. In the second phase, Alexander the Great orders his soldiers to finally construct around 100 stakes each so that the mechanical corps can close the ravine between his camp and Arnos Petra with alluvium. There in the north and east, side leading to the fortress, Alexander the Great and his catapults met as an obstacle a deep ravine. So in order for the siege engines to advance and the gorge to be bridged, they built an earthen embankment with carpentry and brought portable materials and earth. The work of his engineers created an embankment about 50 meters high, 150 feet high, but the embankment created was made too hastily towards the sides of the gorge, and it collapsed and precipitated, falling precipitously downwards, with the result that the initial progress had to be made again, to this slowing down. So the soldiers were ordered to cut again 100 stakes each, and first Alexander the Great started to throw earth on the slope from the top of the hill, such an obsession where his soldiers were encamped to create a rampart. His aim was to reach the height of the rock so that his crossbows could strike the fortified Indians. On the first day, the burn advanced about 1 stage, that's 185 meters. During the next 2 days, their work under the cover of catapults from the firm ground and slingers from the rampart, repelling Indian attacks on the earthworks, continued. In the third phase and fourth day of their siege, some of his soldiers occupied a hill that was the same height as Arnos Petra. Alexander the Great therefore ordered his mechanical corps to direct his engineers, that is, to direct the advance towards that height, so that his bows may be discharged against the Indians from the same height as them. Nevertheless, at the end of the third day, a low earthen hill now connected the nearest edge of Pir Sar's mountain, and the siege was feasible. Alexander the Great, as always, was in charge and in the front line, and gave the order for the general attack, while soon the first striking force was repulsed by the throwing of boulders, which were thrown from above downwards. In the fourth phase, the Indians are surprised by the intense persistence and efficiency of the Greek Macedonians and are forced to ask for negotiations, but in reality they want to obstruct somewhat to leave Arno in the night. So Alexander the Great is informed of this. He does nothing to prevent them, but he sets up ambushes and intercepts them in their flight. There is no indication that the alluvium eventually reached the height of the Eagle Stone, Arnos Petra, which was 2 kilometers high. It was no longer necessary after the defeat of the Indians. So the Indians were amazed by the persistence of the efficiency of the Macedonian engineer and asked for negotiations. When Alexander the Great learned that they intended to be stuck until the evening, then they would slip off the rock, and he made it easier for them to unhook. Thus, in the end, Alexander the Great completed the siege of Arnos Petra, killing some fugitives who did not surrender, according to Alexander the Great's contemporary biographer, Robin Lane Fox, or more exaggeratedly by Arrian with a massacre. He had laid ambuscades, attacked them, killing many in their flight. Arrian also says, according to Diodorus, it's written that he simply let them escape, but this version is not consistent with his more general tactics. Perhaps Diodorus wanted to compensate for the negative image of Alexander the Great, which he gives to the massacre of the mercenaries in Massaga. Curtius, however, does not mention anything about Alexander the Great's passage from Arnos Petra to the Indus River and back again. nor about the preparation of a long siege, nor about the resistance of Alexander the Great's approach to Arnos Petra, while for its capture says that climbers were used, as in the Sogdian Petra. He tells us that the Indians put up an effective defense, killing several climbers and celebrating with drumming for 2 days. However, for some reason, which perhaps the Roman historian does not explain to us, on the third night they began to abandon the fort. Then Alexander the Great ordered the whole army to fall back. The Indians, believing that they were under general attack, panicked and trying to escape in the dark. Most of them were killed on the impassable cliffs of the area. The siege was carried out, and Alexander the Great climbed inside the fortress after being pulled up to the eaves of the walls on a rope. So to celebrate the Epinicians, a temple was built and sacrifices were made to Nicaean Athena, goddess Athena, traces of which were identified by Orelstein in 1926. It's noteworthy that as a conqueror, although far from his country, he thanks the goddess Athena every time he wins, and especially her because what he had already accomplished, namely in reaching the Arno stone, was something very important, since the goddess Athena is a goddess of strategy and war, and on the other hand, with her wisdom, would close the Arnos Petra, that is, the channel of communication. Let's remember that the Acropolis of Athens, the Parthenon, is dedicated to goddess Athena. Thus, Alexander the Great occupies the rock, which the myth wanted as impregnable even by Hercules. It's possible that it's said that it's not exactly the Hercules of Greek pantheon, and Arian gives us a version and believes that it's probably a local legend, which the communicators of Alexander the Great gladly adopted this story in order to not magnify his feat. Then the Indians who guided him did not lose, of course, as they received 80 talents each as payment for their services. So there on the top of the rock, Alexander the Great makes sacrifice of goddess Athena, Athena Nike, victory, and built a fortress where he then installs Sisikotis and an Indian Automolo as a guard. Alexander the Great's next aim after Arnos Petra, and in the early spring of the following year, that is 326 BC, was to combine his forces with those of King Taxiles, who was king of the Indian kingdom of Taxila or Taxacila, against the neighbor of King Poros, who was the king of the region of the river Hydaspes. Alexander the Great was now free to continue his journey to Pentapotamia, and the reputation of invincibility seemed to be building up after Persia and for the ancient India, where the equally victorious battle of Hydaspes would soon follow. So the hypocrite who writes this article expressly and unequivocally declares to you that this space is an extra entrance-exit portal without stability, where the activity of transcendental entities and mysterious unnatural phenomena are observed, the so-called immortals and the transcendental entities of our galaxy, when they are in the union field, the Nion field, perceive the beginning of the new creation from the unimaginable flashes of light that occur at the gates, phenomena that gives us a signal for the beginning of the new creation activities, as are also the present years in the closing of Plato's Aniantus. The transcendent entities that cooperate on our planet have different forms of energy within space-time and high-frequency energy levels at higher spiritual and psychic levels than Earthlings. Thus, with the proper control and exercise of his brain powers, after Alexander the Great was initiated in the previous years by his mother, and not only her, he was able and caused the rupture of his neutral pituitary gland by acquiring the material body various supernatural properties, and this only happened in Arno Petra. Alexander the Great's voluntary contribution and participation in the campaign had as a plan to save the planet Earth and the advancement of the human species. His soul, when he died, is a photogenic matter, and with the components of the essence of living light, was renewed and then of itself reproduced and did not decay, for it was now immortal. Souls must know that they are terminations of the rays of the eternal light. Each of our souls at the moment of its conception is immaterial and invisible. It's a condensed energy, a cloud, a generative substance, subtle as a vapor. Our good deeds during our life here keep us unchanged in the reflection of the divine being by improving the image of our body, which houses the soul. On the contrary, our bad deeds change us and destroy us completely. Our soul evolves faster than our body and is completely free in its choices because it always builds our body according to its own desires. When it becomes fully aware of its potential, it rules the individual's personality and thus acquires its spiritual essence. Alexander the Great, before closing the Arnos Petra gate, the space-time portal, finally communicates with divine entities and acquires the appropriate knowledge. At that very moment, imagine the intoxication of that moment, because now he feels like a very important person because he's performing divine ergon for the whole planet Earth. And therefore for him, or for those who manage during their life here to live in the higher spheres of the soul, their astral purification took place in the constellation of Orion because there are more favorable conditions and earthly delusions are more easily expelled. The weight he finally chose to carry on his back was massive, but don't laugh. Alexander the Great was working for himself, that is, as any earthling would do, because he had to carry out his mission. After this success, there was delirium and drunkenness, and you need to have a very proper balance within you to endure such a great success, which was spiritual in nature. Normally, he should go back to his homeland, Macedonia, northern Greece, which, as I have written to you before, means a distant land, referring to the first point of the planet Earth, which is Taygetus. That's just around the area of Sparta. But Alexander the Great has now lost his way because there was no longer a higher goal. He had achieved his goal. As a superior soul, he would have the right to choose his next incarnation as many times as needed to reach perfection and the realm of personal bliss, the writer says. And now it didn't take much sense for him to continue, but he brought behind him a large army and many expert scientists. Plus, after such a brilliant success closing the Arnos Petra, he also lost interest, but not that he could also turn back, since he could not publicly reveal his real purpose, his real mission. So he continued on the road without turning back. And mind you, a very short time, and with the means he had then, in only 10 years, he died young. Many speculate about illness or murder, but no one gave us another version that he could have killed himself, since his life no longer had much meaning. In the earthly realm, due to the material situation, many times our soul is ostracized from the sphere of its mission and succumbs to the intense attraction of material pleasures. The same thing happened to Alexander the Great at some point, so that he could not put himself and his desires under absolute control. References such as that of Philostratus and Tyaneus Apollonius, Book 2, paragraph 10, tells us, but he heard that it was captured by Alexander and that it was called Arnos, not because it was 15 stadium high, but because the sacred birds fly over it at the height, and why at its top they say that there is a fault that attracts the birds flying above, something that can be seen in Athens in the area of the Parthenon. So you'll find that the Parthenon, I talk about the Parthenon 4 videos before this one. Now, Strabo tells us about the rift that existed at the top of Arnos Petra in his Geographica, Book 14, paragraph 11. He says, it's a cavernous sanctuary which is called a charon, a pernicious one that has an aphrodisiac. There is a cave called Holy Charon, a pernicious one who speaks. Apophras equals gate, that is, the exit and entrance of the pernicious Charon. Apophras is a gate which our ancient ancestors considered as an entrance and descent into Hades. The specific channel is a channel for promoting and reabsorbing etheric ions intended for the regeneration and living of the ascended and ascending anthropomorphized beings from Tartarus on Thonos, to put it out, that which are living under the surface of the earth. To put it more briefly, at the time we had very negative energies on the planet Earth. If you remember that Alexander the Great also found a lot of Nephilim, Genesis giants, that is what he called the abominable races. They were part animal, part human. Some of them were even headless. Now, going to this, the specific channel for promoting and reabsorbing etheric ions intended for the regeneration and living of the ascended and ascending beings from Tartarus or the underworld of Hades. More briefly, at the time we had very negative energies on the planet, and if they left upwards, they would create a problem. But also this Diabolos was a space of invasion and new entities from space, and Alexander the Great closed his gates of the Indies, from which the 72 kings of the Nephilim of their people were to emerge. He closed them underneath. In that year, the Lord, in a year, the Lord will open the gates in the Indies, which Alexander the Great of Greece closed, where then the 72 kings will come out from there with their people, the so-called abominable nations, the Nephilim, which are more disgusting than any abominable stench. These will be scattered all over the world, and they will eat people alive and drink their blood. Also, Plutarch on Isis and Osiris, paragraph 356, writes this: Typhon acquired 72 men as conspirators. Also, the traveler of the 6th century BC, Scylax, who toured India at the behest of the Persian king Darius, that's 6th century BC, to record, that's around the time of the Battle of Marathon, at the behest of Persian king Darius to record its nations and tribes, writes also about the canine heads, okay, the dog-headed people. Let's remember these were considered gods in ancient Egypt. They were in the mountains of the Indus River in central India, where they lived in caves and underground galleries, people who had a dog's head, and all of them, men and women, had a long tail. The Patriarch of Constantinople, Magus Photius, 810 AD, also mentions about the canine heads, cynocephalus. In Plato and Phaethon, he tells us that the underworld is a space of vast cavities inside the earth, which are connected to each other by arcades, while on the surface of the earth there are mouths, openings that is, which are entrances that lead to the interior. As for the areas in the interior of the earth, these are a continuation of its hollows, and there are many around the whole earth. Some are deeper and more open than the one we inhabit. Others again are deeper, but their chasm is smaller and the chasm of our own place than the chasm of our own place, where, however, there are some that are smaller in depth and wider than our own place. All these areas under the earth communicate with each other at many points. We're talking about underground tunnels here, with holes sometimes narrower and sometimes wider, and they bring us out himself in other places. Many of the poets have called it Tartarus. Even in the Apocalypse of St. John, there is talk of those who are under the earth. Chapter 5, verse 3. And no one could, neither of those in heaven, nor of those on earth, nor of those who are under the earth, open the book, nor look at it. We are also impressed by Pseudo-Callisthenes in the Acts of Alexander. I, Alexander, also met many nations that ate human flesh, eyes, and drank of the blood of animals and beasts like water. They did not bury their dead, but ate them. I attacked them, killed many of them with my sword, and enslaved their country. And they fled disorderly until they were fortified behind the 2 mountains which are called the Masses of the North. And there is no other entrance or exit than that between the 2 mountains. And I used every means so that they have no exit other than this. And in that place I built bronze gates, 22 cubits wide, 60 high, and I plastered them inside and out with lime so that they could not be opened either with fire, nor with iron, nor by any other means. For lime extinguishes fire and breaks the irons. Outside these awesome gates I built another building of hard stone, each of which was 11 cubits wide, 20 high, and 60 long. So I secured this new building, watered the stones with tin, which I mixed with pencil and covered with acetine, so that nothing could ever open them, and I called them the gates of the Caspian. And there I closed 22 kings. The names of these nations are Magog, Goth, dog-headed nuns, horned horns, Syriasaurs, Ionis, Catamorgus, Imamtobos, Bells, Samandres, horsemen, that is the horsemen, the centaurs, Epambori, O Muhammadi. I will ask you about the Dul Karnyan, and I will tell you his story. We established his authority over the earth and granted him the means to carry out whatever he wants by following his path. He traveled until he reached the west. He saw the sun rising in the bubbling spring, near which he found people. We say this, O Dikeros, you can punish this people or treat them favorably. I will punish, he answered, and the impious, and behold, I will abandon them to God, who will punish them severely. But he who believes and does the good will be rewarded exceptionally, and I will assign to him an order that he will carry out alone. Dikeros once again took up his course, until he reached the place where the sun rises over the people, where we had nothing to protect us from its heat. Yes, it is, and we all know it, and he followed another path until he arrived between two promontories, at a foot of which live a people who barely understand the Tina language. And this is what the people said to him, O Dikeros, Gog and Magog will corrupt the Can if you, for a fee, raised a barrier between you. The authority given to me under my Lord said this is a greater reward than yours. It's enough that you help me willingly, and I will raise a barrier between you. Bring me several pieces of iron plate, sufficient to fill the space between the two mountains, below the fire until the iron is red hot. And then he said, bring me broken copper as I pour it out, and Gog and Magog shall not be able to pass through the wall, nor pierce it. This, and added to this work, was the power of my Lord's long suffering. And when God wills, I will change this into pieces. The promise of my Lord is unfailing. This is Quran, chapter 18, verse 83 to 98. Alexander himself, in one of these letters to his mother Olympiatis, writes that he was given some secret uses which he himself will communicate on his return only to her. Well, he never returned. It's even the events of this divination being secret, let him come again and say to her alone, Plutarch says. And this is what he wrote to his mother, priestess Olympiada, who was also the child of the king of the Chaonians, Helen, who possessed the speaking stone, which was given to him by Apollo. Apollo for us Greeks is the sun Sirius, who is the ruler of the constellation Kinos, the swan. This source is Ioannis Togianos, and I've translated this for you from a Greek article. It's amazing that they had technology that you can go interdimensional. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support, and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.